The lessons I learned here, the power of faith, the importance of community, have remained with me and sustained me in the same way the Black church has sustained the African American people from the days of slavery to this day.
The church gave people a sense of value and of belonging and of worthiness. I don't know how we could have survived as a people without it.
You know, people forget that until 1910, 90% of the African American people lived in the South. Before the Great Migration changed that ratio. 48% of our enslaved ancestors, 48%, entered what's now the United States through the port of Charleston. So you're absolutely right. Our roots are geographically in the South and spiritually in the church. The first Black church was formed, First African Baptist Church in Savannah, Georgia. The Black church is the oldest, the most continuous, and the most important institution that African American people created. It was a laboratory out of which, first of all, 50 ethnic groups from Africa formed into one Pan-African people. And secondly, it's where they developed a form of Christianity with a liberating God at its center, a redemptive force for a nation whose original sin was what? Slavery itself. So not only was it where our people learned to read and write, where we learned about economics, but it's also where we created one of the world's greatest musical forms. In fact, W.E.B. Du Bois wrote famously that with a smirk, that America had only produced one original art form. And that original art form was what he called the sorrow songs, or Black spiritual music, which, you know, more from the spirituals into gospel music. And I believe that he was absolutely correct. But something that Reverend Now will affirm is that our church had a political basis. You know, it was the first denomination was formed when Richard Allen and Absalom Jones in Philadelphia were denied full membership in St. George's Methodist Episcopal Church. So what did they do? You know, they had to sit in the back. They couldn't take communion before white people. Then they had to sit in the balcony. And then 1793, 1792, they just got up and walked out. They formed Bethel Church. And then in 1816, they formed the first Black denomination, the African American Methodist Church. So while our religion was always about heaven and, you know, belief in the resurrection, it was always fighting anti-Black racism. It was born fighting anti-Black racism. So the sheer transcendent power of belief on which it's based had two forms. One, in an eternal God and life after death, but also that one day, by and by, our people would be free. And many of our greatest political leaders from the very beginning came through the church. You know, during Reconstruction, 3 of the 16 Black men elected to Congress were ministers. And overall, 2,000 Black men were elected or appointed to office during Reconstruction. 243 of them were ministers. And we all know about 40 acres and a mule, right? Well, 40 acres and a mule was announced as a policy by General Sherman, but only after he had a meeting in Savannah in January 1865 with whom? 20 Black ministers and lay people